We'll get started. So please join me in welcoming Leon.
Well, good morning, everybody. Fantastic to see so many of you here today interested in bringing the online and the offline together. Just fantastic. As Scott mentioned, I'm Leon Condon from Engagis. Engagis, our mission is all about helping leading organisations to better engage with their customers and, importantly, staff to achieve more. Specifically, we're passionate about the digital transformation of the physical space, the offline. So I'll start this off and then the creative minds in the room will bring it home together. So we're more of a digital infrastructure provider. Products and solutions you'd see from us are things like digital signage, LED video walls, interactive screens, endless aisle kiosks, a lot of mixed realities coming in and a lot of analytics to go behind that. Pretty exciting space. That's a little bit about me, but before I get underway, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. That'll give us more context. So I'm assuming that we've just got an incredible amount of talent here of experience makers, people that are very familiar with the online space, digital websites, mobile sites and the like. But can I just have a quick show of hands, who also has an offline channel? Bricks and mortar stores, branches, hands right up high? Wow, over half, fantastic. So secondly, tell me, over the last 12 months, how many of you have deployed digital infrastructure to those stores? I don't mean one or two POCs or stores, but a rollout. Just a show of hands? Wow, about 5%. Okay, so really what we're seeing is your response there is consistent with what we're seeing. Is when it comes to retail is really flying online. Last year, globally, we saw 24.8% growth, incredible growth. But still, this is $2.3 trillion, a lot of money, but total retail at 22.6 shows us all the opportunity that we've got together. We think that there's an incredible opportunity to take the talent, like in this room, of digital online and bring it offline. So specifically, Australia is not much behind. It's 93.5%, so we've got 6.5% is actually online. Everyone is talking a lot about the growth of online, but what I'm encouraging you here today is to think about the offline and how you can bring the same skills together to drive engagement and in turn conversion. So let's just talk about what we call the bridge. At Engagis, we've been fortunate to work with a number of leading brands and agencies. We collaborate a lot with agencies to bring the total experience together. Great brands, like Scott mentioned, Telstra, Australia Post, the banks, ANZ, Target stores, 7-Eleven, Suncorp has been a beauty recently come through. And you may have seen that even in Pitt Street Mall. What have we learnt from all of this? Well, we've learnt a lot of the premise that we have for online digital design just doesn't translate to the physical store. It's quite different. Online, we know from the very first click, you are identified as a user. Behind the scenes, sophisticated profiles are being built that enables great marketeers to give that personalised conversation, that next best offer, and make a meaningful relationship. Whereas in store, from the moment you walk into a store, you're anonymous. It's a black zone. You're not identified, and suddenly you're in this paradigm of generic marketing, one size fits all. So what we're seeing is the opportunity to bring personalised and retargeting into that physical store. And the requirement then for us to build as all digital marketers is to build this bridge from online into the physical store. Our belief is that the stores can become living, breathing, dynamic websites. And at every turn, we look for that as a test. Now, online's got a lot of great benefits, but physical has got plenty as well. Online, you're limited to just sight and sound. And maybe you've got a clever chatbot as well looking after you. But when you go offline, you've got all the senses at play. You've got touch, feel, it brings it all to light, which is quite fantastic. So what we believe is marrying the online into the physical space, we can actually bring such levels of engagement that we can bring delight, which in turn will drive greater conversion. In addition to that, online, of course, has got the role of the store associate. We underestimate how much people like to work with people. And we see time and time again when you are looking at particularly the larger tickets in life. Yes, technically you can buy a house online, your home, you can buy a car, or you can source a $1 million home loan. But where does that actually occur best? Where is the greater conversion? It's in the physical or offline space. So I want to just talk to you about 4 trends that we're seeing overall, and maybe 6 technologies that are supporting these trends. Firstly, this bridge that I'm talking about, this digital to physical connector, the bridge. What we see is all of us as marketers have this pursuit of the holy grail, the omni-channel, the multi-channel execution strategy. Whereas in reality, we seem to forget the last mile where 90% of the conversion is. So we're seeing today leading brands and retailers are actually integrating the offline and online. They're building this bridge. And what we're seeing is technologies such as facial recognition, such as anonymous video analytics, mobile apps integrated with beacons are enabling these bridges to occur such that customers are identified. Now, and there's been great examples of that. The Amazon Go store, for those of you that are familiar, is a great example where those technologies, powered, of course, by artificial intelligence and cognitive learning, are able to really bring a seamless, frictionless approach across. Now, identification enables personalisation. So I wanted to just secondly mention personalisation. And really, again, what we're seeing is we're combining technologies to bring that to life. But as well as the ability, because it is there today, for one-on-one marketing, it's actually there. We can do it. There's no technology constraints. And yes, we're seeing at the high end of banking, that's starting to come forth, and maybe high end of gaming. But across the board, where we're seeing the most benefit is really in the anonymous space. So here, what we're using such things as this anonymous video analytics and Wi-Fi to learn so much more about a space. Take, for example, convenience stores, something like a 7-Eleven. We helped the team out in 7-Eleven to build out their business case for digital signage. And what we saw before we introduced digital into the space, the messaging was like a simple form poster. You would have seen it, a $1 Slurpee campaign. A $1 frozen Coke. Now, that might make sense to many, but Leon, as a Tasmanian, waking up in Hobart on a Monday morning, a frozen Coke doesn't really make a lot of sense. However, for a 10-year-old boy coming home from school in Brizzy on a smoking hot 35-degree day makes total sense. So what we did was we brought together the weather feed, we brought the anonymous video analytics that gave us an estimate of age and gender. It also gives us a sense of engagement as well, or happiness levels. And we brought that together with time of day and location, and we created a plethora of campaigns to be triggered in real time when the case arose. So, for example, if we've got a 30-year-old strapping tradie in Melbourne on a cold day at lunchtime, what would you offer them? Hot pie. And because we're friends with Coke, they'd get a Coke as well. Visualisation. So visualisation, we're seeing just incredible, on the back of 3D gaming technologies, we're seeing brilliant models come to life in the retail environment. Such detail and incredible visualisations that can be presented through various technologies. And that really is enabling customers to see a much wider array of products, see the ability to configure and customise to their own personal tastes, all in retail. The last one is the big one, analytics AI. Now, I'd love $1 for every time I heard AI mentioned the last few days, and I'm sure you're the same. But what we're seeing is online, Facebook has something like 98 data points to trigger an ad. Think about a store, a physical store. There's none. If you think about other physical spaces or other physical environments, a car, a production car. Today, a car has 300 sensors to improve the driving of a car. A smart home has 160. In a retail store, we've got the point of sale, at the end of the customer journey. Makes no sense. So we're seeing the ability in this space to use the same techniques such as A/B testing of digital signage, where we're able to really test the effectiveness of content and see how well it drives the conversion that we're after. So technologies, half a dozen technologies here that I'll try to quickly go through. I've already mentioned Internet of Things or IoT sensors, new name, but similar technologies. But it really is seeing the ability for sensors such as the Wi-Fi picking up the signal of something like 86% of customers into our retail stores. We can see them uniquely. We don't know their name. But anonymous video analytics, every touch of our touch screens, both by the customers and by the store staff on their tablets. We're getting so much analytics together that can really drive this personalisation and this audience measurement. Mixed reality I've mentioned. AR, VR, great technologies. I'm not really a huge fan of VR, virtual reality, in a retail environment. It does break that or disrupt that beautiful relationship with the store associate. However, we are seeing fantastic 3D visualizations. Inbuilt at the moment, we have the leading car companies' 3D car configurators being built. We have the leading home builders building homes that you can walk through and experience. We even have clothing. It's a fantastic space that will definitely change the way we shop. We are seeing incredible engagement levels when we get into that space. Mobile's playing a big role, and tablets. We're seeing once you digitally enable the store associate with a tablet, you can gain so much greater levels of service. Most customers are doing so much shopping in advance that we need to equip the store associates. Great applications are things like concierge, product finders, endless aisle just on a 10-inch or a 7 or 8-inch tablet in the hands of a store associate. Queue busting, all great applications that we're seeing. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, we've talked briefly about that. But what we're seeing in a retail environment, lots of applications. We have the Adobe Cloud giving us great intelligence of the next best conversation. But in the store, we can do things such as, instead of having years gone by with a static poster, where the campaign concept was selected probably by the marketing manager flicking a coin, now what's possible with AI is you could produce maybe 100 executions. You put all of them to the cloud, make them available to all the screens, and the customers can decide which ones give the most engagement, which ones by store and location, and that really drives, again, a higher level of conversion. Of course, you're creating a lot of content, but again, we're using AI-powered bots to create content. We're doing as many as 100 templated clips per hour. It's incredible production rate. Voice, wow. If AI is hot, wait till next year on voice. So well and truly, our little assistants, Siri, Cortana, Alexa, Google, they're making such a difference. The take-up of voice is the highest take-up of any tech to date. It's twice the rate of mobile. We will definitely see voice have a huge impact in the retail footprint, both online and offline. It's intuitive, it's natural, it's personal for the customers. The death of the QWERTY keyboard and the touch is not far away. We definitely will see that. Computer vision. Wow, this is an exciting area we're in. Exciting. In 2017, the big tech companies confirmed that voice and vision, computers seeing and hearing, is now at parity with humans. I mean, that is startling. And it has enormous applications for us. We are definitely seeing vision technology where, I mentioned the Amazon Go example there before, but what about just clothing? We're seeing vision technology where you walk in and you stand in front of a magic mirror, a smart mirror, and it sees what I'm wearing. It builds a profile, checks with the database, and gives a recommendation of what I might like to be wearing with this. God help me. So this is all brought together by the cloud. The intelligent cloud brings this all together. Our partnership with Adobe, Scott and I were just talking about it prior, It gives enormous ability to marry the two worlds, the offline and the online. There's two key things by integrating our platforms together. We have a lot of analytics available that can be sent to the source of truth in the Adobe Cloud. One profile for the customer built together, and in turn, we can be a channel. All of our screens can be a channel for that next best conversation, that next best action. Exciting prospects. Listen, I've talked enough about this today, but I did add it again because I really think that this is an important part that is holding us back. We need to get retailers and brands to start measuring the offline. It doesn't cost much. We can measure so much about everything that is happening there, and it helps us prove and improve the capabilities to really deliver our marketing in store. These slides, by the way, will make available to everybody. So just a few quick case studies to run through. We mentioned Telstra. Telstra is our biggest telco, our biggest online company, but they're doing great investments in the offline. About 10 years ago, we stopped paper, printed paper. We launched the new stores in Telstra back in 2007. We've deployed since then something like 27 experiences that help both the customer and the staff on that journey. We've deployed something like 5,800 screens fixed and thousands of mobile screens across all their stores. This one I quite like. This table can actually see, and we deployed this a while ago. You put a mobile phone down on that table and it will recognise what the phone is and will pop with little speech bubbles of all its features and benefits and everything else. You put two phones down side by side and you can see a showdown, a comparison of the products that you're considering in your selection. It really is a place to play and learn. Today, they're continuing to do enormous test beds, object recognition. We can pick up when a customer walks into store with an old model iPhone and then pop on the screens that, hey, maybe you'd like to upgrade to the iPhone 10. So there's a lot of power coming along into that store. Laminex, a favourite of mine. It really sees the marriage of online to offline and back. If you haven't seen it, please get down to Alexandria here in Sydney and check out their showroom. Building a kitchen is really complex. It actually takes about 6 months. It's, the splashbacks, the skirting boards, the cupboards, the bench tops. There's a lot of complexity, no wonder. There's 50,000 SKUs alone for Laminex. What I like about here is we've built 9 discrete connected experiences that go in a complete journey. You can start online with a product which I love, which is the Style Finder. So it's like Pinterest. There's a whole series of questions, but you answer the questions by touching on the photo. So within 90 seconds, for example, I learned that I was coastal, and sure enough, this kitchen popped up, which was me, all over me. It was perfect. And then I can make an appointment. By the time I go into the showroom, I walk in there at, say, 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and unlike other environments, I'm known. The consultants have a tablet, the concierge tablet, and they know it's Leon Condon. They even know my style in coastal, and I'm on a journey that's already connected. They give me a card, an NFC card, and the NFC card enables me to walk around the showroom and just tap on the surfaces that appeal to me, the floorboards that I like, the stone bench tops, etc., such that when I come back to the solution finder, it all populates beautifully there in front of me, my styling, and then I can take it on the journey with me home as well. I've talked about cars, I've talked about models being stylised, but here's a product which we're rolling out called Customise, which is going into clothing stores. And it's enabling office wear or workwear or sportswear to be customised. So you can touch and feel the product, you can try it on, you can get the size right. So you've got those other sensors I was talking about, but then you can customise it. You put the logo of your company, the colours, etc., and away you go. It's a great example of personalisation and customisation. I won't spend too much time on this, but I put it in the pack with you. While a lot of the design principles of online apply to offline, it's far more complex. You've got hardware which is unattended devices in a public domain. Uptime is our critical thing. It's not like we're doing campaigns that have to live for 4 weeks. We're typically doing at least 5 years and often 10 years with this technology. And it's true, we've got plenty out there that's 10 years. I like this. A little bit of Darwinism just to finish off. We are in a retail evolution. And it was really true what Darwin said back in 1809. It's not the strongest that necessarily survive or the most intelligent. It's those that are most responsive to change. This is all about us responding to change. A friend of mine, John Stein from Intel, added another dimension. And he said today's rate of change is the slowest that we're going to experience. So if you're not changing now, it's only going to get harder for you. And really what we're seeing is online, a retailer is changing posters maybe every 4 or 6 weeks, whereas online, a Telstra is changing banner ads 3 million times a day. Alibaba and Amazon are winning the race because they've got a rate of change which is second to none. All right, just a few key messages for me before I wrap up. This digital transformation of the physical space, I put to you as a huge opportunity for all of us. And I really, really strongly encourage you to collaborate. The personalisation and visualisation at the point of sale is making a world of difference, and it is incredibly engaging. The analytics, and particularly the insights that come from the analytics, is what's driving the change and enabling it, empowering and fueling. I encourage each of you to get an understanding of your customer journey. Where are the pain points? Where are the opportunity points? How can we unpack them? So thank you for today. I encourage you to please connect with me either as email or online and continue the conversation, or if you're interested, we do run retail safaris up George Street, which are great learning as well. So thanks for today.
Oh, sorry. So thanks again very much to Leon. He will be up at the end to answer some questions. So next I have Ben Moir from Snepo, and Ben's going to run you through kind of some of the activities that they're doing. Thank you. Please welcome Ben.
Let's go. Thank you. Amazing. Thanks for all being here. And I think my job's a lot easier after seeing yesterday's talkers and then being led in by Leon there. Some of the amazing things we saw yesterday really set the scene for why we're here today, talking about the more practical things and how to implement and what's coming. So I just wanted to reflect on Vince and Ronnie talking yesterday about designing with purpose. And a lot of the work we do is about trying to convince people to use tech and give it a purpose. The days have gone of just gimmicks and putting in things for the sake of it. So we've been working in the museum space for a number of years, and some of the things I'm going to show you today are about learning from those and being present in those experiences. Because a lot of people think of museums as dusty places, dusty artefacts with little wall labels and things, but to be relevant in today's society and to engage with a much broader audience, the museums are forced to rethink how they design those experiences. So we can learn a lot from that, and I want to share some of those experiences of designing for museums with you today. Vince and Ronnie said all we have is now, so thank you for coming today. It's amazing that all of you have turned up here. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people and the land we stand on, and the elders past, present and future. And that's highly relevant to one of the meaningful stories I'm going to share with you today. So a little recap. I'm not talking about the online world. Snepo and my business doesn't work in online anymore, or video streaming or online gaming or social. But as Leon found out, there's quite a lot of people in the room that might be responsible for a physical space. So that's highly relevant. And we're talking about what some people would call the offline world, but really it's just the real world. And we can learn a lot from that. So as you leave the conference today, I'd ask you to be present, open your eyes and look around and see the experiences that are happening around you. I mean, even in Darling Quarter, the totems, the digital totems, you wouldn't have seen those 5 years ago. There's a Japanese artist, there's an artwork between the two buildings that is a massive digital piece. And the investment that Darling Quarter and this area has put into those pieces is incredible, and it's really about turning the city into a bit of a museum. But we all know about exploring, and digital's a part of all of these experiences. Wayfinding or learning new things about nature. So we're going to go through, and our city is changing. I mean, the city is becoming a canvas for these new experiences. Everyone's probably been to Vivid or Dark Night in Melbourne or Dark Mofo, and so we're starting to see our cities in a different way and starting to engage with these precincts in a totally new and sort of enlightening experiences. So the retail environment is well across the changes. Some would think that retail is slowing down, but the brands, sometimes these are digital-first brands that started online, are moving into the physical, and the success they're having is phenomenal because they're willing to change quickly and evolve quickly. And also the museums and gallery spaces have evolved very fast in the last few years. So all of these experiences are offline experiences or real-world experiences, but they increasingly involve digital. They also, as Leon mentioned, they keep working when the internet is down. I mean, all of the work that we do in the museum space, it just has to work. The experience wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the digital being up and running. So we have to survive internet outages all the time, and it's something that it's crucial to the experiences that are happening in the physical space. Some of the experiences that are possible with digital now would kill you if they failed. We've got rebreathers, and so humans are able to explore new worlds using digital technology, and only through technology that we can do that. And retail and brands are beginning to experiment. I would encourage you all to experiment. It's about trying these things so you can learn from it and evolve from it, and you just need to keep trying these things and be in the game early. You don't need to get it right the first time, and museums definitely don't. But people need to have a deeper relationship with their customers and listen to their customers. And we believe that the museums and galleries do know their customers intimately and their visitors intimately, and I'm going to talk you through some of the things that we do to find out what the right experience is for a museum. And how you can leave a lasting impression on them. So let's go through some of the key points. I guess you have to listen to your customers, and I'm going to show you some examples of how we do that with the museum space. You have to create memorable or meaningful experiences, and that's about finding out the stories and the things that mean something to people's lives and engaging with them. And that's why it's so important what we talked about yesterday and what Vince and Ronnie talked about, and Cindy, about a deeper, meaningful connection. And using emotion as well. Our limbic brain, if you actually can connect to the emotional core and our limbic brain, you can get a much stronger, deeper relationship with your customers. And so it's not an intellectual experience. It's not about handing over information or an exchange of information in these digital experiences. It's about going straight to the core of what it means to be human. And that's how you can build that relationship. And it's about building love and trust and hope. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a museum experience we built for the Gallery of First Australians at the National Museum in Canberra. It's hard to convey what the experience is like unless you go there, and that's the thing about physical experiences, you have to actually be there. So I'm going to talk more about the journey we went on to design this space. And it was a very, I guess, complex story that we had to navigate. We're talking about a hyper-local Indigenous community. There's 3 communities that have been on that land for 25,000 years. There's the Ngunnawal, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri. And those 3 groups all had to be in the same room for these workshops. And some of these groups hadn't spoken to each other for years. On top of that, you have the National Museum is built on I guess, a burial site or a place of significance for the Indigenous and First Australians. So there'd been a distrust and they hadn't engaged previously before. And so this was the first project where it was stakeholder workshops with the actual community to work out what their stories were. And I can't really talk too much about the stories because what we found is that they're not our stories to tell. We were told quite early on, and it was actually refreshing to be told to shut up and listen. And so we went into the pitch with an idea and won the tender, and started talking about our idea, and that was very quickly shut down, and then this whole process of listening started. And as we listened more, it just became 18 months of workshops listening to these local stories and the stories that they wanted to share in the museum. And it was hyper-local, but it was also national, and it had to represent a national story as well, and joining the national story to contemporary relevant experiences too. So it's not the 25,000 years of objects which represent memories. They wanted the museum to be relevant and contemporary today. So this is the elders that we worked with. And as I said, it was 18 months of workshops, and it was just an incredible sense of gratitude and celebration as well. So as we worked with these people, the stories became incredible and more meaningful the more we heard them from different people. And by the end of the experience, we were all friends and we were hugging each other, and there was tears shed when they were also part of the review process to see what it was like in the physical space. I'm going to show you a brief video just shot on my iPhone, but let's have a little look. It helps if you have kids for testing. So they're my daughters. We were in the space for a number of months actually testing it. And what you're seeing there, it was digital first experience. So it's the first time I'm aware of a gallery has appointed a digital company to be the prime contractor. And then underneath us, we had the architects, interior designers, and the spatial people, engineers. But they wanted the experience to be digital and contemporary. And so what you're seeing there is a flip on the idea of interactivity. We had to rethink how to convey the meaning of being present and now. That was the core thing that came across all our stakeholder workshops. And so typically in a museum experience, like kids want to run around and jump and do things and touch screens and things. We had to try and flip that. And what you're seeing there is that when someone walks into the space, they're presented with a story about grass seeds, which was relevant to the area. And only if you stand still for a certain portion of time does the canvas reveal. And so what you're seeing there is a map of Canberra before they flooded the lake. And under that lake are all the burial sites and significant sites that are now buried under that lake. And so you only get to see the map of Canberra if you stand still. If you get 3 people together and you create a mob, then other things can happen. So you encourage, or you might, serendipitously discover that if you stood in a certain place and then 2 other people joined you, then there's a bogor moth migration, and the grass seeds grow into reeds. So we were linking these memories, these living memories that these people still have of what Canberra was like and what the significance of the area was, and linking them to the present, but doing it in a future storytelling way. And people were encouraged to stop and look, and tread lightly as well. Like some of our original ideas were about, footsteps through a map of Canberra, and it was so interesting to see their responses. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not about leaving a footprint. Like, it's about treading lightly, and if you're leaving footprints, you've done something wrong. So our way of thinking had to be challenged the whole way along, and they were very open and sharing with what we were doing wrong, and then filling those gaps with more amazing stories that were highly relevant. We talked about the modern design, and this is looking at the experience the other way. The experience always has to work both ways, because it's a gallery between the Landmarks Gallery, which is sort of white history, and the First Australians Gallery. So this space is about a mental shift, moving from colonial history into Indigenous history. And so it's almost a pause space. It's a place to slow down, stop, and become present, and almost sort of meditate for a moment before you transition into another experience. But the objects you see here are contemporary objects made by local Indigenous artists. So you can see the light shades, even the carpets and the chairs are all fabrics dyed with ochres and natural colours that the community supported. It was also an audio experience. It's hard to convey, but audio is the quickest way to sort of engage and create an emotional response with the limbic brain. So what we have around those pillars is a 16-channel audio experience, and as you walk through those totems, you get to experience the different countries. And that was another thing I learnt on this journey, was that the First Australians have hundreds of different countries. We have snow country and sea country. I didn't even know there was a thing called sky country, but it makes sense after working with them that that's another country, and it has its own stories and songlines in it. So as you're walking through those different countries, in the background I think that's snow country, elders from that region would whisper in your ear using directional speakers, and so you'd get these stories or memories told to you as you sort of explored the space and triggered those experiences. One of the things that I think retail or brands could learn from what we do at the museum is testing. Even though we'd worked for 18 months on the design on paper, and we used some VR to test it, it wasn't until the space was physically available to us that we could actually start the work. And that can be quite confronting when typically construction projects are, you hand over the keys and you're open to the public a few days later. To have the luxury of spending 2 or 3 months in a space and then keep redesigning it is essential. You can't design on a 27-inch monitor these experiences until you're actually walking through the projection space or standing in front of a 12-metre long projection wall. You don't know what the impact's going to be. And you can't, although the technology is getting better with tracking people and doing heat mapping, nothing beats actually sitting there and actually watching people use it and watching how different age groups use it, how different demographics use it. Even elderly people in motorised scooters, we had to check that they could move through the space and wouldn't get caught up in the poles. But we had those groups as part of the reference stakeholders. So we had a deaf person, we had a blind person, we had elderly people, and they were all part of the test group, and they were all welcome and encouraged to comment on the design. And we had to incorporate a lot of changes in that last 2 months to make sure the experience was as good as possible. So nothing really beats being present and open and collaborating. and no amount of design thinking and workshops really make up for actually having the space and playing in that space. So that's something that I think the museums do well, and it would encourage you, if you can't shut your store down for a number of months, then build a replica of it. Build it in a warehouse and test it out and bring in who you think your audience is and see how they're going to use it. Because it's incredible what you learn, and that's really when the fun starts, and that's really when you can learn a lot and the project can get to the next level. Another experience we've designed recently is in Melbourne. It's for ScienceWorks, a science museum, and the exhibition is called Beyond Perception. It's important that these experiences can be designed for up to 10 years. The National Museum was for 10 years, scoped to last that long, so everything's spec'd out to the highest degree. Beyond Perception was a new experience for teenagers. They weren't engaging with 13 to 19-year-olds or 18-year-olds. They sort of felt that the things they had weren't sophisticated enough. So Beyond Perception was another journey into engaging with the stakeholders and the visitors and working out what they wanted. So Snepo, it was a collaborative effort. The amazing thing about the museum is the curators and the team at the museum wanted to take a collaborative approach and bring in multiple parties. So we even worked with Arup, and they did the sound design. And so we had 5 or 6 different companies all looking after individual components, knowing that when the test space was open, we'd all work together to fine-tune them. We never knew what they were going to look like together, but each of us went off on our own journey to cover a key area. So the first one you're seeing here was explaining black holes and gravity waves, a rather challenging topic. We started this journey before the Australian university teams discovered and proved that gravity waves existed, which was also interesting. So we're working with the university on how you might detect a gravity wave, what is a gravity wave. But to put it simply, is when 2 black holes start orbiting each other before they collapse into a single black hole, they create ripples in space and time, and those ripples travel out across the universe. And the theory is that we could detect those waves on planet Earth. And it was during the development of this simulation that the waves were actually detected by an Australian team. So we had to communicate that in a way, and there was no interface, there's no touchscreens going to communicate gravity waves. So what we did is we actually built our own touchscreen, and we used spandex and rear projection. And then we also built our own sensors to detect how far someone was pushing into the screen. And actually that gravity well that they were creating with their finger actually became part of the simulation. So it was a real-time simulation of space and time. And the black holes would travel down into that well and then start orbiting around the depression in the space-time. And if you could get 2 black holes to dance around each other, then the ripples would start forming and the ripples would go across the surface. There was actually 5 of them installed. It took about 9 months to develop, and we had a set up in our office. We had one of these sitting in our office for 9 months. The testing we found out, obvious thing, you'd think they're obvious now, but people aren't just going to use their hand. What happens when someone puts their whole head in there? What happens when someone uses it as a lounge, so people would back into it and then just sit inside the material? It was just incredible to watch the different ways that people would use it. And that testing phase was incredible, and we learned a lot from that. But most of all, we worked out what was fun. So the idea at the start was very, very different to a material touchscreen. But watching and learning and playing with it, we ended up in a very different place. But overall, the experience was phenomenal because of that. So the other thing we also like to do is it's about real time. So we could have communicated these ideas through maybe motion graphics or a video, but those mediums are probably best left for online experiences, and the museum has a pre- and post-visit experience. So we had to use something that was responsive and interactive. And so when you're doing a black hole simulation, you have to work out how to do that simulation of gravity real time. And so it's not a movie, it's not a pre-render, it's all running off the graphics card as about 60 frames a second. That's highly relevant to the second experience we were responsible for, which was about fluid dynamics. Fluid dynamics, if anyone's a physicist, it's one of the hardest things to simulate. It's why they still use wind tunnels, or in the case of simulations, you might let a simulation run for up to a week to work out how fluid moves around objects and obstacles. But we had to do it real time because the museum wanted dials or obstacles on the screen. So as those were turned, the fluid would move around those obstacles, and it was a fully real-time experience. So the maths that went into this was luckily we'd started on it before we even intended for the job. We had a research project to study fluid simulation, So it was probably about 18 months of different maths and different simulations to work out how to do it as fast as possible. It's 6 screens long, so it's a combined experience. Again, we thought this was going to be a game, and the brief was to make an engaging game for children or for teenagers. What we ended up with was totally different to a game. It's a continuous real-time experience where 1 or 12 people can all play with the simulation at the same time. The gaming elements were dropped and they just weren't needed. And we also worked with Arup to get the sound in sync. So the sound is completely generated. There's no pre-recorded loops. So as you're simulating and interacting with the experience, it's creating a soundscape. And the soundscape actually runs across the whole museum. So every single interactive experience has its own localised sound, sometimes with up to 10 speakers, and then the entire space. And trying to design that so it's not a cacophony or overwhelming was part of the reason why we had to do it in the space. Because we basically built tools, and those software tools were used to do rapid evolution of the product while we're in the space. Everything from the sound through to the visuals. This is some of the testing, us living in the museum. So a lot of it was like a construction site, and that's fine. As soon as the screens were up, that was one of the first things they put up. And on the bottom left there is us testing the PCBs. So we built our own rotary encoders. So when people were turning the dials, we knew what angle they were at. So it was an incredible sort of nearly a month of living at the museum, and it gives new meaning to night at the museum. Very late nights. Working with the designers, so the museum had their designers working with us till late every night, and the curators, scientists visited. Developers, we had our developers working on it remotely around the clock. And most importantly, the target audience, which was teenagers. So I'm going to play a short video, which I think the museum's done a great job of summing up the difference between how this is designed and maybe some other projects imagined. And yeah, after the video, we'll hand over, but I'll play the video to explain it. Oh, this is interesting. We still use Adobe Flash. So we use Adobe Flash as a tool to speed up the animations and work out experimentation before we put it in the algorithm. So you use the right tools for the job. If they do the job, it's good to not have to design them from scratch.
We're at ScienceWorks for the opening of a new permanent exhibition called Beyond Perception, which is all about revealing the amazing world of science and technology in a new, immersive way. And the best thing about it, it's been co-curated by teenagers for teenagers.
It's a lot about input. They've come to us with things that they thought they would like, and we've agreed or disagreed.
I reckon the best bit is this whole exhibition. It's just amazing.
So we got them in once a month to tell us if they liked our things or if they didn't like our things. They like open-ended things which they can figure out a challenge in themselves. They really didn't like things which are so straightforward or sort of babyish, you know.
It's inquiry-driven. You explore it with your own goals in mind. It's intriguing, it's hands-on, it's social. You discuss it with your friends. You post it on social media.
The exhibition has been 2 years in the making, with the Victorian government contributing $3.75 million. And its focus is on hidden science, everything from gravitational waves to invisible light to synchrotrons.
So we're exploring the unseen aspects of physics. So we're looking into waveforms and energy forms and forces that you can't easily see. So as you explore gravitational waves, you create your own black holes, crash them into each other and send out bursts of gravity. As you're exploring turbulence, you can move physical objects around. You can blow particles through complex patterns. You can move digital objects around. You can look at the flow modeled through computers.
There you go. Thank you. Thanks very much.
What a grump. We're a bit of a weird bunch. We're a nimble group of technologists, designers, producers, general makers of things. We're a mix of generalists and specialists, and I think it's an important note to make, or point to make. We've talked a lot about the online and the offline, and Ben mentioned it's the real world. We don't really see a line. I tend to agree with Ben. There is no line anymore, and I think that our work is kind of testament to the fact that we hop between between what the project needs and what we can provide. We don't think about it in terms of off and online. So we have web developers and designers, and they can turn their hands to a range of tasks. And then we have electronics experts and mechanical engineers and audio engineers for that specialised knowledge that is required to get a project off the ground. Our toolkit is changing, and it's constantly changing, and the biggest challenge for us as a company making things is to actually keep abreast of what is coming down the line and making sure that we're playing with those things. So why do we do what we do? Look, this is kind of a rather rudimentary way of describing what we do, because it's wide and it's expansive, but we prototype, we produce, we are a storytelling team primarily, and I'm going to get to that. We design, we use filmmaking, we do creative workshops. We use whatever we need to get to these some of these physical spaces built, or some of these digital experiences built. More and more we're playing with that blurred line between what technology we have at home and how we might use those, and Leon spoke a bit about that. But then we're sort of hacking them to see sort of what we can potentially play with in a more physical space. It's why we're called Grumpy Sailor, and I think it's probably relevant right now. I guess when I was a little kid, I grew up down south in the country. Mum and Dad obviously couldn't afford nice toys, so I ended up getting this little tiny sailor. If I go as far as I go back, the first thing that I can remember when I was a little kid was this tiny little sailor, and he was a grumpy little fucker. And I'd play with him all the time, and he was made of wood, he was very tactile, and I used to put him into really unusual circumstances with my brothers and sisters. But I remember him vividly, and I guess when we were creating Grumpy Sailor, the idea was if we could create something that was really, that you could really feel, then you could create something that people would remember. And I guess that's kind of guided the work that we put out into the world. So I'm going to show you just sort of the work that we did last year, which is this. So that's the Grump. That's our year in review, which we do every year. So I guess I'm going to run through a couple of projects up here before I kind of sort of sum up why sort of more relevant points around this session. This particular project was a project down in Melbourne. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favour. It's a Molly joke pun. He was a guiding force behind the Australian Music Vault. We don't actually have, as a country, we don't have a Hall of Fame. Well, we do have a Hall of Fame, but it doesn't exist in a physical space. I'm going to sort of just give you a bit of context around why why they did this. They have a huge, enormous collection of physical objects that relate to music. And they wanted to create a space where you could go and explore that, and the Arts Centre in Melbourne won the government bid and to create this spot. I'll play another video just quickly, just to give you a real quick summation of it, and then I can talk a little bit more about how we sort of came up with it
The objects in the Performing Arts collection are phenomenal in terms of their importance to Australian music. We were tasked with this challenge of finding some way of stringing these all together. The heart is a beating digital light sculpture supported by a soundscape that, depending on where you're standing within the space, will feed you different music. If you go inside the heart, what you're going to get is an experience of music that is almost completely sensorial. Around this digital sculpture are an incredible array of some of the most important objects to the Australian music scene. In front of each of those objects, we've got a digital label which allows you to explore those objects in more detail. The mixtape is an NFC card that the user can take around the exhibit and curate their own playlist based around the objects that they're looking at. So these are the songs of my youth, or these are the songs that are really powerful to me, or these are the songs that I never knew existed. The Australian Music Vault at its core is really a shrine to Aussie music, somewhere it could be celebrated and loved, and it really is about feeling the music in the space, in the moment. It's not something that you can experience anywhere else.
That wouldn't have been as weird if Claire was here, because that was my voice. Anyway, so when we were sort of originally given the brief, the amazing curatorial team down there who got this job and had to tell these stories, they said to us, we don't want, when anybody experiences music, they experience it in space often that they've created themselves, through a set of headphones. Or they'll go to a gig, less and less in Sydney these days, but you'll go to a gig and you'll really experience what that musician is trying to tell you. And I guess what they wanted to do is to replicate, or not replicate, but to create something that really spoke to the way that we experience music. So that it wasn't something that you could lift up and take somewhere else, that you had to go into this space. So it was all about feeling, which is, a pretty difficult brief. But when you start to kind of think about it, you kind of start to, I think Leon was talking about the opportunities that you have when you are playing in a physical space. You can actually sort of play with things like taste and sound and smell, and you start to mess with senses, and that's where really what the focus was here, was to create something that people could feel. One of the key parts was these digital labels, and I think it's probably important just to talk quickly about them, because what they allowed people to do was to actually take the experience with them. I think that's probably, more and more, and I'm sure Ben can talk to this, people are asking you when you come into a museum-based or gallery-based project, for a user to be able to take the project with them, or to take the parts that they love with them. And I think it's probably something that the retail sector could probably learn from a little bit, in terms of, well, how, if you're going to give something to take with them, how do you make sure that it's not something that's shit? Make sure that it's something that they really want to take with them. And so you've really got to think about all of those different steps along the way as you go. There's just some more nice photos. This particular room, this was kind of, how do you make it almost a religious experience? Because I guess when you go into to listen to music, you can have, it has a sort of emotional response to you. So they wanted to create almost like a cathedral or a shrine, or you walk into this room and in the middle of the floor space, and it really, the speakers we've turned up so loud that it will really just shake your bones. And it's something that I think is interesting from a creating memory, that you're not going to forget something like that because it's really affected you. Mad Hatter's Tea Party was a project we recently launched. So we worked with the Acme team to help sort of develop up what the Wonderland exhibition was. And when they carved it up, this was the one thing that we were sort of adamant that we really wanted to work on, because we thought it was a really interesting opportunity to create something that hadn't been created before. And I think in this particular project, we pushed some of the Adobe suite to a level that I don't think anybody has before. We made it break a few times. A few calls to support. You'll understand why when you kind of see it. You couldn't pick a really more fun brief to work on than the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. It's such an integral part of the story, and the whole exhibition, the Wonderland exhibition, was just built around this kind of idea that, or not an idea, but a fact that it is one of the most appropriated works of fiction in the world. It gets used in ad campaigns, it gets done in movies. There's books that have been written around ancillary storylines that have been created around the Alice in Wonderland. So the Mad Hatter's Tea Party was really about how do you give somebody an opportunity to feel the story and step into it. And there is this kind of moment when you sit down at the table where the whole thing sort of comes to life, and it's just bonkers, and it's you can't really describe it, and you can't translate that. That can't go anywhere else unless it goes with the travelling exhibition. So it is going to go somewhere else, but you can't actually replicate that. You have to be in that space. An enormously challenging project to do, and I guess what is important to note here is that when you do embark upon a project, sometimes the technical isn't ready for the story that you're about to embark on. And what you have to do, or what we feel we have to do, is that we have to stay true to the story that we're trying to tell. And this is the same for whether you're a museum or whether you're a retail outlet or whether you're a brand experience store. You really do have to think about kind of what are you trying to say, and what kind of experience are you trying to leave behind, and let that lead. Don't let the technology lead, because if you let the technology lead, then you're going to end up in a not as vibrant and not as immersive and not as emotionally connecting place. So I'm going to get to... I'll very quickly talk about this. Punch Drunk was... does anyone know who Punch Drunk is? They're an incredible theatre company based out of the UK. They have a big project that is probably most notable called Sleep No More, which is a 4-story experience in New York City that's been running for about 10 years. And it's a play that you walk around. You move around the play, actors run past, everyone's wearing a mask. It's visceral, it is emotional, it's wonderful. So the Oracles project, the Google started working with them, Google's Creative Lab, and they needed somebody to build an underlying piece of technology so that would allow us to know who you are, where you are, and what you're touching. So this is the technology that we've been playing around here is indoor spatial tracking, which we've had to work really hard to crack for this particular project. But once we'd cracked it, we needed to build a specific object. I don't know whether that object right there is it's a lantern with a fair bit of tech in it. So if you're holding on to the lantern, It uses a combination of kind of frequency analysis to know who is carrying the lantern and what they're touching. So if you've seen a whole bunch of parts of this project, or when you walk into the space, it'll know whether you're allowed to go through that door or not. So we're starting to kind of play with kind of these kind of different kind of texts that really aid the story more than anything. So how are we driving these experiences? I mentioned some of them. WebGL and its other friend, open frameworks, real-time rendering in browser, not just for online. We're taking often taking web technologies and we're putting them into a physical space, and the other way around. We're playing a lot with with location technology, because when you're looking at a physical space, you really kind of need to know what people are doing when they're doing it, and trying to find ways that you can augment their experience while they're in there. Capacitive touch, like with that door, that's magic. When you turn around, like when you're actually playing with it and you touch that door handle, and it opens for you, but it doesn't open for anyone else, there's a pretty incredible emotional response to that. And then physical, tangible, taking things that, Claire and I come from a film background originally, and I think we've taken that knowledge around smoke and mirrors and put it into this digital framework that we play with. And so we're often using technologies that might seem old, or might seem redundant, or might be used for one specific thing, but as a team, we kind of look at kind of what we're trying to do, and we're trying to kind of come up with the path of least resistance to get us there. So we often use old technologies that just haven't been used in a particular way. So why do we do this? Some of these sound pretty cool, but I guess for us, we're fixated on creating immersive experiences really because we want to tell stories. And when you're creating an experience, you want people to feel a connection to it, either emotional or otherwise. If they don't feel a connection to the work that they're experiencing, they won't be impressed, they won't remember it, and they won't talk about it. So with that in mind, we think it's really key to remember a couple of things. Innovation without a human connection, it has no resonance, and it has no point, and it's going to fall on deaf ears. We need to engage at an emotional level or a poetic level, and there's a wonderful podcast called Invisibilia, where they talk a lot about how we make decisions and how we change our minds, and that we used to change them based on rationality and logic. We don't change them based on those reasons anymore. Particularly in the world of fake news, things have changed. So the poetic becomes more powerful, and I think it's probably worth, if you're interested in this stuff, have a listen to that particular episode. And then we should lean forward into stories, keeping storytelling at the heart. We don't start with the technology. We start with what it is that we're trying to do, and then we try and find a technology that allows us to do that. Tech and innovation thus becomes a support for this emotional aim. We always say we want to use technology in aid of human interaction, not at the expense. So, what do? We continue to hone technical skill, but we try not to make technical skill our master. We continue to experiment with technology and avoid a one-size-fits-all, which Leon spoke about before. It just doesn't work. You can't, when you build something and you try to fit it in to a project, then you're doing the project a disservice. Remember that you need to tap into something to make the experience more memorable. Ask yourself, what's the hook? What's the story? What's the heart? What is it that I'm trying to do? And I know I've banged on a bit about that, but it is actually the most important thing. There's no formula and there's no easy way to get there. For us, sometimes we think we nail it and we don't, and sometimes we think we haven't nailed it and we have. I guess the thing that keeps us driving to create these kind of really somewhat weird immersive online and physical experiences is that we're making them regardless of where the technology goes, and we're just trying to find different ways of creating them in a memorable way so that thing that you really feel is that thing that you really remember. Hope I haven't butchered it too much. I'm sure Claire could have done a better job than me. But happy to chat about any of this stuff later if you want.